why is he calling this film history and talking about a movie that only came out 10 years ago? Blah, blah, blah. I basically assume that most of my viewers are currently living in the present and that they'll have more context on that. And if I start there, I can more easily explain to the past once you get to what's going on now. And because I got a big hot take about where film is going. But a better question is, why the fuck am I talking about film history at all? Well, the answer's simple. I wanted to talk about that new Spider-Man movie and use that as a platform to talk about why I love Spider-Verse so much. But I ain't seen the new Spider-Man movie, and the window of relevance flew past, and on the whole I can't reliably see movies when they're relevant because they're expensive, and I kinda live in the middle of a forest. You go, honey, you're in the middle of my shot. Could you move? But that's not really what I do on No Bones About It, is it? Wait, I can just do whatever I want. There are no laws. So, that's what I'm gonna do. Also, I'm gonna, wear a bunch of hats and outfits and stuff, cause I wanna get a new look for this YouTube channel, you know what I'm saying? New day, new me. This hat is the ugliest one, so I'm honestly really considering it. So we do need to take a quick look at the past before we can get into the now. So let's start with the 60s and 70s and oversimplify the ever-living shit out of some decades in American film. In the 60s and 70s, Hollywood had noticed the fucking massive counterculture of angry kids who didn't like all that Hollywood code shit showing up, and they wanted to capitalize on that. But they had no fucking idea how, so they let some of the kids do the thinking for them. This led to an era called New Hollywood. So who were the kids on the block making these new movies? Just some fucking nobodies like Francis fucking Coppola, Stanley goddamn Kubrick, Martin shitting Scorsese, John cocksucking Carpenter, to name a few. This was probably the most artistically bold and interesting era in American cinema. I mean, you had fucking David Lynch and Alejandro Jodorowsky out here making people question what film even was. And then these two guys came along, and they each made a movie that made a shit ton of money. And then Hollywood realized something. These movies were kinda simple. And it seems like audiences really like simple. The 1980s saw a massive resurgence in corporate meddling, studio-centric film, and big companies trying to make money and not giving a single shit about art. If the plot of the movie can't be described in 25 words, go fuck yourself. But that's not to say that there were no indies in the 80s. In fact, because of the 80s big business culture, there were a lot of new production companies started up. Companies like New Line Cinema, Working Title, and Carolco. And this led into the 90s, which saw a slight uptick in non-Hollywood outsider filmmakers. And now, you don't need to ask a big studio to make the movie, you just need to ask them to put it in a theater, and you could just have it put on VHS and skip the theater altogether. There was a little bit of a pushback against the Hollywood machine by the indies. But now the Hollywood machine was making bigger and more expensive movies than ever, especially with the advent of CGI. And then came the 2000s. While there were still smaller studios, a lot of them were being eaten up by Hollywood studios. Or should I say the massive media conglomerates that had eaten those Hollywood studios up. And these gigantic monstrosities came to realize something. People like to watch movies based on things they know exist. And that's when film adaptations became huge. Sequels became huge, thus leading into reboots, remakes, all that fun stuff everybody hates conceptually, but, goes to see anyway. And Hollywood hasn't let up since. And then you get into Hollywood in the 2010s. This is being called the franchise era by some. With the big advent of cinematic universes especially. It's hard to look at Hollywood in a very positive, creative light right now. People are constantly talking about how Hollywood has changed since the 60s and 70s. How it's bigger, making more money, but creatively fucking bankrupt. But there's been a new pushback from direct-to-focused movies, ones outside of Hollywood, a bigger pushback than the one we saw in the 90s. Currently, we got movies coming out under new indie studios who value quality first, made for a new audience who knows their shit, movies with interesting premises that are pushing the bounds, slower movies, thought-provoking movies, and revivals of genres that had gone into the gutter. My big hot take is that we seem to be entering a new era. And I'm not talking about the franchise era, it's an outsider era. One I like to call the new death of Hollywood. So, why am I calling it the new death of Hollywood? Well, for 4 reasons. 1, the movies, like the name, are similar to New Hollywood's movies in a lot of ways that I'll sort of go over as we go over this era. 2, a lot of these movies aren't being produced or distributed by big Hollywood companies, and some of the ways they are being distributed is making Hollywood sweat. 3, there's a lot of other things right now making Hollywood sweat. 4, I'm an optimist. I like to hope for the best. So that leaves the question, what the fuck am I even talking about? Well, to really understand that, I think we first gotta look at how a movie is incepted and then created. So, to oversimplify something else, let's say there are 2 ways a movie gets made. Obviously, there's a lot more, and a lot more nuance than I'm gonna put forward, but let's break it down real general-like. So let's call these 2 types of movies producer movies and director movies. A producer movie is when producers or a producer gets an idea, reads a script, reads a book, reads a synopsis for a book, or reads a review for a book and thinks, I want to make a movie about that. So he gets together some money, maybe pitches it to his friends for some extra money and a cut, and then hires a director, a screenwriter, a cinematographer, a casting director who then hires some actors, camera, lighting crews, etc. He delegates all of these guys to make this movie. Now, many of these people have creative input on how the film is put together. They can have some control over how their job is done, seeing as it's their job. But ultimately, they don't have the final say. The producer does. So they send the producer updates on how it's going. He gives them input, mostly looking at the financial side of things. And then, most likely, has the production company that they're part of distribute it to theaters. A producer's job is to get a return on his investment so that he can make more movies. The movie might creatively suffer from his changes, but that doesn't matter if the movie makes more money than he put into it. Then there's the other type of movie, a director movie. So similarly, this starts with someone getting an idea, reading a book, etc. But the difference here is, instead of delegating someone to direct the movie, they direct it themselves, and then usually they write the screenplay too. And they put down some of their money and shop the idea out to different producers who are willing to take a chance on the vision. That, or they use what money they have to hire actors, camera, lighting crews, all that jazz. Then, unless one of the other producers can distribute it, they shop it around to film festivals, showing it off to distribution companies who might say, yeah, that's pretty damn good, I want to put that in the theater and take a cut of the money. This method of directing gives the guy who had the idea full creative control over the movie for the most part. It allows them to push the boundaries and not worry as much about profitability as making something the way they want it to be. Now, this era has these sort of split down the middle. Producer films are coming out of Hollywood, and director films are being distributed by smaller producers. And I think eventually the indies are going to come out on top in this. Not because they're going to make more money than Hollywood, but because they got a lot less shit internally and externally gunning for them. Hollywood is in a real nasty spot right now, and that spot can only be so good for so long. But Hollywood realistically isn't gonna die anytime soon. But if it does, in maybe 30 years, I think this will be a good starting point for its downfall. We don't need the big studio system anymore to make movies. With increasing access to movie making technology and shit like Kickstarter, people are able to outdo Hollywood at their own game on an iPhone. But before I get ahead of myself, let's start at the beginning. Now, there's a lot of debate over when this era in American film where we're in started, or if we are even in a new era at all. Now, I'm going to say it started in around 2011, because my outlook is more focused on all of the good new indie movies rather than the, bad Hollywood stuff. This year saw several movies of that sort that sort of embodied the good we're seeing. Lynn Ramsey's We Need to Talk About Kevin, Lars von Trier's Melancholia, Mike Mitchell's Chipwrecked. These are a couple, but there are two other ones in particular that we're gonna go over. And today we're just gonna look at the one. Drive. So, funnily enough, Drive is actually a producer movie. Sort of. Like I said, there's a lot of nuance and this shit goes on a case-by-case basis. So let's look at this particular case. A producer named Mark Platt reads a review of this book called Drive and thinks, that character ain't something you see that much in movies anymore. So he gets the idea to make a movie. He tells his other producer friend, Adam Siegel, I don't fucking know about it, and they both buy the rights to the movie. And they both want the lead to be played by Ryan Gosling, currently the funniest working comedy actor.
My mom still cries over the lost baby pictures.
Well, it's a shame. You must have been adorable.
Now, Ryan Gosling at this point was hot off the heels of The Notebook, a film adaptation of a book by Nicholas Sparks, famous homophobe and man who locked his autistic nonverbal son in a car for 4 hours and yelled apple at him. And I don't really think I've talked about how much I hate this man on this channel enough, because not only is he a legitimately horrible human being, he's also a fucking hack! Jesus Christ, I keep getting sidetracked. Suppose that's just the power of Gosling. I mean, look at this man, hot damn. This is the hat I'm most disappointed in. I was hoping it was gonna make me look like a barbecue fan, but instead it just sort of makes me look like a racist. And it makes me sad because I very much do pig barbecue, but like, I mean, I think the guy who donated this to the Goodwill also pig barbecue, but looked at the hat and I just said I was gonna stop getting sidetracked, god damn it. Anyway, Mark Platt tells Gosling that if he signs up for the picture, he can have any director he wants. So Gosling does something really interesting. He chooses Nicholas Winding Refn. Refn had just finished a film called Valhalla Rising, a movie that was generally seen as a good movie by critics, but that made fucking no money at all. I'm talking negative $5 million. Valhalla Rising was a fucking weird and introspective movie. Refn was starting to get autistic with his work at this point in his career, so he saw this script and had to get convinced by Gosling to make the movie. But when he decided he was gonna make it his way, and no one really stopped him. The instant he showed up, this was no longer a Mark Platt or Adam Siegel movie or a Ryan Gosling movie. This was a Nicholas Winding Refn movie. So, what exactly does that mean? Or how does Drive differ from a normal movie? Well, that's the big question, honestly, because on the surface it doesn't really. It's a movie about a stunt driver who falls in love with a girl, then gets in bad with the mafia, so he needs to fight the mafia and protect the girl. Boom, there's your pitch, 25 words. It's the basic ass plot of a Hollywood action movie, but where it differs is with the nuance, cause you see, a film ain't just the plot, it ain't just the script. And the reason why this movie is so important to this era is because the movie is a fucking essay as to why. The things that really set Drive apart are evident in the first big heist scene. The car that our driver uses as a getaway vehicle is a silver Impala to keep a low profile. This was actually Nicholas Refn's car, believe it or not, and this sort of flows into the rest of the scene. They rob the place, get in the car, and from there, it's just pure tension. From a camera in the passenger seat. It's quiet, all but for the game on the radio, the police scanner, and the music. It's got an infectious pace that builds tension incredibly cleverly with the simplest shit. The most tense moments in this scene is when exactly one cop car is chasing this guy. And that's the thing. It's not a spectacle. It doesn't blow up. It isn't huge or crazy. It's small, it's simple, and it is so much better than the spectacle because it feels real. This feeling of realness drives the whole movie. The dialogue and the acting are a big part. Every conversation feels like people talking. It feels candid. It doesn't feel like some scriptwriter writing the dialogue. It feels like people just hanging out. And it's not the way the dialogue was written. It owes a lot to the directing. There were a lot of jokes about how people just sort of stared at each other in this movie when it came out, and those weren't attacking it. The slow pace and meaningful glances added to the realistic feeling. Refn could have chopped these scenes up, and another director would have, but he let them linger. And the movie is so much better for it. The pace also showcases how the cinematography is doing an incredible job at telling the story. It hangs on these long shots so you can get an idea of how everything was set up to bring about a certain mood. Like, for instance, how we get all these long and happy shots of people's faces in the car when shit's going real good. But when Mulligan tells Gosling that her husband's getting out of jail, it lingers on the back of their heads. This movie is fun as hell to pick apart, because it's got a lot of really clever things to notice, even outside of the big stuff. One of the big things is that elevator scene, which is fucking perfect. This tense situation that goes from tender to fucked up in seconds, showing off the duality of our hero to his love interest. He just sort of stands there, looking like a wild animal, covered in fucking sweat and blood with that fucking stare. Our hero does genuinely reprehensible things, half the time feeling no remorse about those things. While the villains, in contrast, just get fucked over into doing bad shit and do show remorse. This leads itself into a great duality of our incredibly flawed and human character, who's good at exactly one thing: cars. Most action heroes like this are good at multiple things, and the reprehensible things they're doing are played off as for a good cause, and this one is too, but the way these things are shot, and the way our hero treats them, makes him come off as a fucking psychopath. Most hero characters are regular human beings who happen to shoot a cop or two. Like, the driver gets into some horror movie shit. This movie has this facade of being like a Fast and the Furious movie, but it's so much more human than those. So, why was this movie important to this era? 1, it was popular. 2, it was popular and not distributed by a major studio. Let's talk about 2 first. So, this movie was produced by a company called Film District. Its first production was a movie called Insidious. Now, if you haven't seen Insidious, you probably heard of it. And if that's true of the first film you produce, holy shit, you hit a goddamn gold mine. So, thanks to this, they had some walking around money, and could produce movies themselves and shop it around to smaller distributors and front the bill for advertising. Drive made $76 million worldwide, and that was on a budget of around 16 mil. That was a pretty good return, and this was one of the films showing the film community that you could turn a profit with something different, and that audiences were actually asking for it. Now, far from being the only movie in that category, this one was a little special, because people really liked it. It got an almost immediate cult following. It became sort of an icon. People were buying the jacket, there's the whole fucking synthwave thing it started, the whole big 80s nostalgia push. I'd say it was started by Beyond the Black Rainbow, but it only got big when Drive hit. And toothpick sales skyrocketed, probably. I mean, the style of this movie even reworked the way Refn did movies. This was a career-defining movie that the man has been working up from to this day. And it got people talking about it. And what they were talking about is how different it was. How much, to put it simply, better it was than other action movies. For a bunch of these people, it was the first time they'd ever seen something like this. This movie had the internet on its side, and I think it drove a lot of people who were just scratching the surface of film a little bit deeper. And it wasn't the only one doing it. There were a few movies that were slowly growing this new niche. Paul Thomas Anderson's films were big ones, Wong Kar-wai was knocking it out of the park, David Fincher was, making everyone his bitch. But the one thing Drive had on its side was that the internet had become a lot bigger than in the 2000s. There were a lot of places to discuss this movie, and a lot of ways to find movies like it. The reason I'm using Drive is because I personally watched this shit happen around it, and it was wonderful. It got people asking, are there any other newer movies like this, pushing boundaries? And the answer was yes. That year even. And Drive, being a far cry from Hollywood's action movie, never had anyone ask, how far can we take this? What does it even mean to be a film? But another movie that came out that very same year did ask that question. And I'm leaving you on a cliffhanger. Ah! Shit.